Let's move over to a men's flyweight matchup now, as we got Daniel Barez coming in at -110. You guessed it, Louis Gurule coming in as a -110. We got to pick 'em fight here. Now we see Daniel Barez returning after over a year away on the sidelines. Last time around, we saw him get absolutely mauled and eventually finished in the third round by submission by Andre Lima. That was a fight where Barez couldn't get any of his game going. He was fighting a much better striker, a much better power puncher, a much better BJJ specialist, and it showed from jump. Lima was dictating the pace of that fight, walking Barez down, outstriking him, dropping him a few times in that second round, and then eventually getting that submission in the third round. And it just showcased to me that Barez, Lima is, in the top half of the flyweight division, so it's not a bad loss by any means, but seeing how badly he lost that fight kind of goes to show where Barez is at in his career. Even his one win in the UFC, that split decision, it was a unanimous decision against Victor Altamirano, but that was a fight that I think there's a good enough case that Altamirano deserved to win that fight. I thought round 1 was clearly Barez. Round 3 was clearly Altamirano. Round 2 is the kind of swing round, and I really felt as though Altamirano's volume for the first maybe 3.5 to 4 minutes of that fight should have done enough to negate the non-knockdown from Barez at the ending of that round. It didn't record as an official knockdown on UFC stats, but Barez did seem to drop Altamirano there, but I don't think it was as significant as, say, what Kopylov was able to do to Tulio in the second round of that fight this past weekend. He was very close to finishing Tulio compared to Barez, who dropped Altamirano and wasn't really able to capitalize much on it. So I thought Altamirano should have gotten that second round, but all three judges ended up giving it to Barez, so Barez does have a win. He hasn't stayed all that active in the UFC, only fighting once per year in the UFC since joining the promotion in 2023. He returns this weekend as a 37-year-old, from Spain, but has often trained in Mexico at Entrum Gym. He's trained with Jesus Aguilar, who is obviously a former opponent of his opponent this weekend. But I don't think Barez, a guy that I thought was a fringe top 15 UFC fighter, I think he's more so of a fringe UFC fighter at this point in his career, as he just can't really get to his game all that effectively. Decent hands, decent grappling, but nothing really special in either of those realms. Now he's going up against Louis Gurule, who has really struggled since coming to the UFC through a split decision win, upset win, on short notice against Nick Piccinini on the Contender Series. He was doing good work against Ode Osborne before he got clipped in the second round of that fight, ended up losing there. The Jesus Aguilar fight played out much closer than it should have, in my opinion, but I think a lot of it had to do with the power punching of Aguilar and the fact that whenever Gurule was throwing offense in return, it didn't seem to do as much damage as what Aguilar was throwing in return. And then last time around, I thought it was the most difficult matchup for Gurule out of the three that he's had in the UFC. Came up short against Alden Correa, who was able to just stifle him completely, utilize a superior striking game, good speed advantage, landed a takedown as well against Gurule, and it was pretty clear that Correa was in the driver's seat for the majority of that matchup. It was a real struggle for Gurule. Now, I feel like I've kind of overhyped Gurule coming into the UFC. I thought this was a guy that would eventually go on and get himself into title contention, largely due to his fighting style. He utilizes a lot of pressure, a high pace, a lot of volume. He mixes in the grappling well. He scrambles well, doesn't settle for bad positions. His durability, for the most part, seemed to be pretty good. And he really just put a high pace on a lot of opponents that would eventually break them. And he was able to either finish them late or end up winning clear decisions. But he struggled to do that against UFC level competition at this point. And again, all those matchups had specific things that he couldn't overcome. And I think that's why he ended up coming up on the short end of the stick in all those matchups. But I'm very happy that the UFC is deciding to give him a fourth opportunity to try to get in the win column, especially considering how tough those three matchups are. Specifically the Correa fight, right? To go from Osborne to Aguilar to then Correa, who I think was the best out of those three fighters. It takes a lot of nuts for Gurule to take that matchup, especially with him being on the cusp of potentially getting cut. We usually see UFC let go of these fighters who go 0-3 to start their career, but for some reason they're keeping Gurule around. Now, Gurule, former Factory X representative, but when there was that major exodus of a lot of fighters leaving Factory X, Brandon Royval, Alexander Hernandez, I think Markel Medeiros even ended up leaving, Gurule ended up going with them. He went with Royval and Alexander, staying in the Colorado area, but starting up their own gym, and that's where he's been training as of late. Now, this is probably the best matchup for Gurule in terms of trying to get into the win column. I don't think Barez is that much better than him in any specific realm of mixed martial arts. He might be a little bit better of a striker and throw with a little bit more power, but I don't think he has the as big of a striking advantage as Korea had. I don't think he hits as hard as Aguilar hits, nor do I think he has the type of athleticism and power that Osborne has either. So take those things out of it. I think Gurule can set the pace here. I think this will be a competitive matchup early, but I think as we start to get in the second and third rounds, we'll see that pressure of Gurule really start to wear Barez down. I think that will lead to Gurule landing a few takedowns, getting some good control time, maybe threatening with a few submissions as well. But I think that pace of Gurule is going to end up being too much for Barez here, leading to Gurule getting his hand raised by decision. And I feel pretty decent about him at -110. I kind of over-trusted him in past fights, but I feel like this is a good enough stylistic matchup for him to finally get back to the winning track. So give me Gurule and Gurule by decision.